Hello friends, welcome to this video. Today I'm here to recap a manga called From Goblin to Goblin God. I hope you enjoy it. Let's get started. So, the story kicks off in this dark, creepy cave. You've got goblins screaming and celebrating because their chief is dead. One of them, holding the dead chief's weapon, steps up and basically says, "Yep, I'm in charge now." This guy's got crazy eyes, all proud of himself, swinging that stolen weapon like it's his ticket to power. But, of course, his buddy isn't on board. He's sitting there thinking, I did most of the work, so I should be the chief. And boom, now we've got jealousy and anger brewing. He lunged at his buddy and bit down hard on his nose. The cave was filled with their struggle sounds, and the screeches just got louder. Other goblins started gathering around, enjoying the fight and placing bets on who would come out on top. For them, this was an exciting way to pass the time. Their simple minds found a lot of entertainment in the chaos of battle. But even more than the fight, there was something else that got them all hyped up. They remembered they still had a prey to satisfy their cravings, and since the last chief hadn't laid a finger on her, the goblins' eyes sparkled with anticipation. So they started whispering among themselves, plotting to go find her and take her for themselves. But some of the others were hesitating. The goblin who was guarding the prey had come back, and he was different from the rest. While the others just had simple cloths to cover their private parts, this guy was wrapped up in ragged clothes that covered most of his body. He looked pretty intimidating, not just because of what he was wearing, but also because he stood out, kind of covering himself like a human would. Even with that scary vibe, he was all alone, without a chief to lead them. The goblins were just acting on their basic instincts, and all they wanted was some flesh. So they were keeping a close eye on the strange goblin, trying to figure out what he was up to, thinking he might know where the prey was hiding. It made sense to follow him closely and grab the prey when the chance came up. But some of the goblins were like, let's wait a little longer, since a few of their toughest guys had already gone ahead to find the prey. They thought it would be smart to let this oddball find the prey first, then jump in for a fight, and take advantage of the chaos to take him and the big guys down, snatching the prey for themselves. They didn't realize that the oddball was actually listening in on their chat. The odd goblin perked up his ears, and instead of just hanging around and walking slowly, he took off running toward where the girl was held. His sudden sprint helped him lose the goblins tailing him, but he ran into another problem when he got there. Just like he had feared, the goblins were all ready to pounce on her. When the girl saw him, she begged for help, her eyes wide with fear. But the biggest goblin in the group stepped up to face the odd goblin, not wanting anyone to mess with his fun, especially since the chief was already out of the picture. Being the strongest, he felt he had the right to claim the prey first. But the odd goblin didn't care about any of that. He was set on protecting the girl he had been watching over. Seeing his determination, the big goblin and his crew decided to attack him all at once. Outnumbered, the odd goblin quickly found himself overpowered by their fierce assault. Even with the odds against him, he knew he couldn't let this be the end. He kept an eye out for an opening, ready to seize the moment without wasting any time. He took out the biggest goblin in the group. The others just stood there, totally shocked, never expecting a goblin to handle a weapon as sharp and deadly as a human's. Fear set in right away. Seeing their leader go down so quickly and brutally made them realize they were outmatched. Panicking, the remaining goblins took off, but not without yelling threats. They promised to come back with reinforcements to take him down. Now that the other goblins were gone, the odd goblin finally had a moment to catch his breath. He knew he needed to gather himself because more battles were definitely on the way. This was just the beginning of what would be a hellish day. As he took a moment to recover, the pink-haired woman named Kelia thanked him again. This wasn't the first time he had saved her, and it definitely wouldn't be the last. She had realized he was different from the other goblins because he had never harmed her in any way. So, she's doing her best to help him out in any way she can. I mean, sure, a goblin wouldn't normally protect a human, but there's a deeper reason for what he's doing. This odd goblin is different because he used to be human too. A few days ago, Lin Tian had a really gruesome accident and died. But he didn't expect that instead of meeting God after getting hit by a dump truck, he'd end up in another world with a system. Even though he had this system, it still wasn't fully activated. He could see some stats, but other than that, it seemed pretty useless. Still, Lin Tian wasn't just sitting around these past few days. From what Kelia has told him, he's picked up some understanding of this new world. This place, created by gods, is crawling with all kinds of powerful monsters, and humans have carved out their spot on this continent through sheer strength. The bummer is that the goblin he reincarnated as is the weakest and filthiest monster in this world. With all that going on, his stats are super low. Even among goblins, he'd be an easy target to take down. So, he's got an overall combat power of only 30. But hey, at least his name is still Lin Tian, which is a bit comforting. Now, there is a way to get stronger in this crazy world. It involves mating with girls. In this harsh reality, goblins can level up by constantly mating and reproducing. The catch? They don't have any females of their own. So, to reproduce, they have to go after other female creatures. That's why goblins are always plundering and abducting women. But here's the thing. Lin Tian used to be human, and doing that kind of stuff goes against everything he believes in. So, he's not going down that path to get stronger. But with his beliefs, he's stuck worrying and trying to think of other ways to boost his strength. He knows the other goblins will definitely come back to attack them. It feels like he's hit a dead end. Seeing his worried face, Kelya does her best to lighten the mood. She reassured him not to worry, saying that after spending these days together, she really understood him better. She knew he was different from the other goblins and didn't actually want to live among them. With a hopeful smile, she promised that when the Night Order came to rescue her, she'd tell them how he saved her. There was nothing to worry about, she believed, because the Night Order is always fair and just. They would definitely agree to let him live in the village. Her optimism and the stories she shared about the Holy Night Order sparked some hope in Lin Tian. He started to believe her words, which filled him with optimism too. He thought that even if the system didn't activate right away, as long as he could hold out until the humans came to rescue them and give them protection, he could survive. Then, he could slowly figure out how to fully activate his system. But things weren't going to be as easy as Lin Tian hoped. The screech of a goblin rushing toward them shattered the brief moment of peace. Without hesitation, he told Kelya to hide. She vanished into the shadows without a question. Just as he expected, a goblin showed up, but it looked like it was alone. Even though it was by itself, this goblin was clearly on a desperate mission. It rushed toward them in a panic, probably because it realized that a human had come and was taking down the others. Believing that strength was the only way to survive, the goblin sprinted to find Kelya so it could get stronger. But its reckless charge made it an easy target for Lin Tian. He quickly took out the goblin right then and there. With the immediate danger dealt with, he quickly told Kelya that the humans were here to rescue her. Her face instantly lit up with joy. He figured it must be the Holy Order. Without wasting a second, she took off to find them, her heart full of hope and excitement. As Lin Tian watched her dart away, he felt a mix of relief and anxiety. The arrival of the Holy Order could mean salvation for Kelya, and maybe even a chance for him to prove he was worth something. But just then, their progress came to a screeching halt as they felt this massive aura flooding the cave. The power was so intense that the walls were practically shaking. It turned out to be a human who was taking down goblins with just one swing. Honestly, he didn't even need to go that hard on them. It looked like he was just letting off some steam. You could see the anger in him as he dealt with the filthy creatures that had dared to mess up his Holy Order uniform. Lin Tian stood there, completely awestruck. This level 25 warrior named Loader radiated an unbelievable presence. What blew Lin Tian's mind even more was when he used his appraisal skill on Loader and found out this guy had an overall combat power of 400. That was the highest stat Lin Tian had seen since arriving in this world, and it made him wonder if Loader was even human. While Lin Tian was frozen in disbelief, marveling at how effortlessly humans handled the goblins, Kelya rushed over to Commander Loader, thrilled to see another human. But then, Lin Tian noticed Loader raising his sword to strike Kelya. Acting on instinct, he quickly pushed her out of the way just in time. It was a rough save, but he managed to protect Kelya from that deadly blow. Still, the sudden attack left Lin Tian totally baffled. Weren't these holy knights supposed to be rescuing people? So he couldn't help but wonder why they were going after Kelya. It hit him that maybe the darkness of the cave made Loader mistake her for a goblin. It sure seemed that way, as Loader angrily called them goblins and complained that one had actually dodged his attack. Kelya quickly tried to clear things up, explaining who she was, but Loader just told her to shut up, claiming he already knew it was her. But in his mind, she had been tainted by goblins and might even be carrying a goblin baby. So he thought it was ridiculous for someone as filthy as her to expect any mercy. He told her it would be better for her to go repent her sins to the Great Holy Mother. Kelya immediately begged him, insisting that even though she had been captured, she hadn't been touched by the goblins. She pointed at Lin Tian, saying he had protected her. But sadly, Loader was too close-minded. He didn't believe a word she said, and the idea that a goblin could save her and not be hostile to humans was just too much for him to grasp. He felt insulted, thinking Kelya was trying to play him for a fool. So he raised his sword again and just told her to make her lies more believable if she was going to spin a story. Lin Tian couldn't believe what he was seeing. He hadn't expected things to spiral out of control this fast. With no other choice, he stepped in without hesitation, pushing Kelya aside and confronting Loder himself, hoping to buy Kelya enough time to escape. Out of nowhere, just before Loder's sword could reach Lin Tian, a magical glow appeared, protecting him from the attack. This powerful magic came from a woman dressed in white, her aura radiating holiness and authority. With a veil covering her face, her presence immediately stopped Loder as she asked him to wait, showing interest in this strange goblin. Commander Loder stepped aside, revealing that this woman was none other than the Holy Maiden, Ifreya. Seizing the chance, Kelya crawled over to her, begging the Holy Maiden to save them. Ifreya helped Kelya to her feet and handed her over to the very man who had just tried to kill her moments ago. Then she turned her attention to Lin Tian and asked if he could understand her. Lin Tian was hit hard by the seriousness of the situation. He realized that Ifreya, the Holy Maiden and voice of the temple, might be his only hope of getting out of this mess alive. So he shook off his shock and quickly replied that he could understand her. Taking a deep breath, he explained that he wasn't a monster from this world. He used to be human. But he had turned into this because of an accident, and he could explain everything if she took him with her. Ifreya narrowed her eyes slightly, taken aback by this unexpected twist. Goblins were usually dumb, lowly creatures that couldn't speak or think properly. Yet this one could talk. Sure, he was rambling about things they didn't quite get, but he did seem smarter than the usual goblins. This rarity made them wonder if he might be a gift from the Holy Mother. So the Holy Maiden Ifreya turned to Kelya, asking her to confirm if this goblin really hadn't harmed her. And Kelya happily confirmed that he hadn't. And not only did he not hurt Kelya, but he also protected her from other goblins and even shared food with her. This was enough for Ifreya to confirm that he was different. Recognizing the goblin's uniqueness, she decided to take him back first for a thorough study before making any decisions. Kelya was thrilled because she had kept her promise to the goblin. Ifreya then turned to Lin Tian and asked if he was willing to join them. Knowing that staying meant certain death, he quickly replied that he was totally in. With a flick of her fingers, Ifreya broke the barrier that had trapped him. She then ordered everyone to get ready to leave. Finally, things seemed to be looking up for Lin Tian. He was now with someone who could actually listen to reason, and he felt a sense of security about his future, which he was really grateful for. So he approached Ifreya to express his thanks, promising that he would repay her properly. But when he looked more closely at her face, he caught sight of a wicked smile that threw him off. The next sound he heard was something he knew all too well, the sickening noise of metal piercing flesh. Instantly, he knew what had happened but couldn't believe it. When he turned around, his worst fears were confirmed. Kelya had been killed without a second thought, her once lively body now lifeless and cold on the ground. Lin Tian was stunned, unable to move. The shock was overwhelming. Just when he thought things were getting better, it turned out to be a cruel joke. He stood frozen, trying to convince himself this was just a nightmare, a cruel trick of his mind. But the voice of the woman he thought was their holy savior shattered any remaining hope. Her wicked laughter echoed through the cave as she mocked the goblin, telling him that when they got back he better repay her well, revealing her true nature as a sadistic monster who thrived on his helpless reaction. And Lin Tian was indeed helpless, shaken to his core as his fragile reality crumbled before his eyes. A week had passed, and in the middle of the village, the bell rang loudly, calling everyone to gather. The villagers knew that the important folks from the temple had something big to announce. As they came together, the atmosphere was tense, and everyone felt a buzz of anticipation in the air. An official from the temple stepped forward and addressed the crowd, sharing some alarming news. The recent goblin raid had caused serious damage to Brighttown. Those goblins had pulled off some sneaky attacks, killing 30 residents of their village. This news hit the villagers hard, and you could feel their grief and anger in the air. But honestly, it was a pretty normal reaction, considering how many lives were lost to those nasty creatures. What wasn't cool was how the temple was playing on those emotions to push their own agenda. The official kept going, praising the temple's actions, saying the Holy Order had wiped out the goblins and avenged the villagers who had suffered. Then the Holy Maiden Ifreya stepped up, and everyone turned to her. She spoke with a calm but powerful voice, telling everyone to keep praying earnestly to the temple because it would always protect its devoted followers. Just like that, her words convinced everyone in the village. Even the skeptics started praising the holy temple. The villagers' faith was reignited, and they looked at the temple with a new sense of devotion and trust. A little while later, Ifreya went back to her quarters, celebrating how well the sermon had gone. Not that it was a surprise. These villagers were as gullible as ever. Now they would pray even harder to the temple and give even more offerings. But her little celebration was cut short when someone called out to her. She turned to see the same goblin from before. Lintian had just come to, and it looked like he had been through hell. His body was covered in gruesome scars, and one of his eyes had been gouged out. Despite all his injuries, there was a fierce rage burning in Lintian's eyes as he kept calling Ifreya a bitch over and over again. But Ifreya didn't care about his words. Instead, a twisted smile crept onto her lips as she marveled at his resilience. With such strong vitality, it was no wonder the temple couldn't wipe goblins off the continent. Now that Lintian had come to, Ifreya was excited to see how poison would mess with goblins this time. That thought made Lintian grit his teeth. It was the same thing happening again and again. This wasn't for research, it was just her sick way of feeding her sadistic nature. With all that built-up anger, he couldn't hold back anymore and lashed out at Ifreya again, accusing her of deceiving him, fooling everyone, and killing Kellia. He questioned if this was really the holy order Ifreya bragged about, if this was her version of human justice. Because if it was, then they were no better than the goblins they hated. But his defiance was quickly met with violence. Ifreya silenced him by forcefully shoving a stick into his mouth. Now that he was quiet, she sneered and questioned how a weak, pathetic creature like him, a lustful goblin, could dare to challenge human justice. She called Kellia a beak who had been bewitched by him and dared to speak on his behalf, and that was a betrayal of humanity and the holy order. So Kellia's death was her final act of loyalty. Goblins were nothing more than pests in this world, and for the holy maiden to even speak to him was a huge favor. He should be grateful and use his small, disgusting body to contribute to the human and holy order experiments. And with that, the torture went on. He helplessly endured it all. The agony was relentless and unending. Even when he slipped into unconsciousness, the next wave of pain would wake him up. Through all the torment, Lintian wondered if he was really going to die here, feeling so unwilling and helpless. But he had no one to blame but himself. It was all his fault. He had been too foolish to reincarnate from a human to a low-level goblin. He had naively clung to human compassion, thinking they were righteous and kind. Weakness and naivety turned out to be his deadliest mistakes. After being taken back to the human village, Loder and Ifreya tortured him and toyed with him in every possible way. Never believing a word he said, they took sadistic pleasure in his suffering. He didn't last long, eventually being tortured to death by a sadistic woman. The only wish that kept him clinging to life was that if he could do it all over again, he would never trust humans. If given a second chance, he would grind their bones and drain their blood. But that was only if he could live again. As his consciousness faded, instead of slipping into an endless void, Lintian woke up in a completely different place. A place where stars stretched for miles. This was impossible. He checked his body and found it was intact, with no signs of damage. Yet something felt off. He felt like he was caught between life and death, making him wonder where he actually was. But he didn't have to wait long for answers, as a system window popped up right before his eyes, notifying him that the Goblin life simulation system had been activated. It then informed him that he was actually dead and gave him a recap of his life, noting that the pain from the week of torture was imprinted on his soul. He would never forget the agony humans had caused him. His end had been one of the worst fates for any transmigrator, and thus the system could allow him to restart and open a new chapter. This was shocking to him. The personal system that had been useless from the beginning only activated after his death. And if he understood correctly, this system could bring him back to life. But it seemed he would be reborn as the lowest creature once again. A goblin. The thought of returning as a goblin, the weakest and most despised of creatures, filled Lintian with dread. To be sure, Lintian asked the system what the yes and no options meant. The system quickly explained that if he chose no, his soul would dissipate and he would die completely. If he chose yes, he would retain his current memories and system and be sent back to the Goblin Cave a week ago. The idea of keeping his memories and going back a week excited him, instantly bringing a smile to his face. This was a chance for revenge. He would make Loder and Ifreya pay for what they had done to him and Kellia. Without a moment's hesitation, he chose the yes option with a determined smile. As soon as he made his choice, a surge of life force began transferring into him, initiating Goblin Life 2.0. But this time, there was a different glint in his eye. The eyes of someone fueled by nothing but revenge. Just when he thought things couldn't get better, the system added a little surprise. Since this was now Goblin Life 2.0, it aimed to help him survive a bit longer. The system had slightly strengthened him. It wasn't much, but he smirked. A little boost was better than nothing. And just like that, he was back in his previous body. But before he could start moving, the system popped up again, warning him that although he had been reborn, the danger was not over. The human holy order was about to find him, and if he died again, the system wouldn't be able to revive him. But this didn't shock him. It was to be expected. Reincarnating once was already a miracle. Now he was on high alert. With the order about to arrive, he couldn't afford to let his guard down. He immediately asked the system what it could do. The system explained that it was called the Goblin Life Simulation System. The host could simulate his life with the system to foresee future events. Every choice he made would lead to different outcomes, and each simulation required 24 hours after it ended. He would earn points from each simulation, which could be exchanged for items. This made him grin. He realized that it meant he could see the future. Such an overpowered system indeed, and it would be a crime not to use it to its full potential. So he immediately started the life simulation. The system prompted him with the current scenario: escape the Goblin Cave. The cave he was in had been discovered by the Holy Night Loader. To escape from Holy Night Loader, he needed to make a critical choice. His first option was to warn his fellow goblins and unite to face Loader and his men, which would earn him a reward of 10 points. The second option was to abandon the other goblins and escape, earning 5 points. The third option was to hide in the cave and pray that Loader and his men wouldn't find him, which would give him 0 points. Although there were 3 options, he was sure that even if all the goblins in the cave united, they couldn't match Loader alone. Only escaping could save him. With this realization, he decided to simulate the situation first and choose the option with the highest score, knowing that if he could exchange for a weapon, his chances of defeating his enemies with a sneak attack would rise. Just as he expected, relying on the goblins here was impossible for survival. Even when he led the goblins in a desperate battle against Holy Night Loader, the vast difference in strength meant they were still slain by Loader and his men. However, he earned the points he needed, so he immediately opened the exchange shop. To his surprise, there were so many weapons to choose from, ranging from short blades to long swords, and every weapon he could think of. There was even an option to buy a gun, and it looked powerful. But alas, his points were too low. Thankfully, there was still a weapon that cost exactly 10 points. It was an elven lightweight swift blade. This small dagger, crafted by elves, gave the user a 10% speed boost and a 15 strength increase. Though fragile, it was incredibly sharp. Without hesitation, he bought it. As soon as the blade materialized in his hand, he felt his stats significantly boosted. It was worlds apart from the typical goblin weapons. He was sure that if he hit a vital spot with it, it could be a one-hit kill. But that was enough daydreaming for today, as he realized that he hadn't seen Kellia anywhere. So he asked the system where she had gone. The system answered that due to the host's rebirth, some timeline details had changed. In this timeline, Kellia was not captured by the goblins and continued to live happily in the village. This was a surprise but a welcome one, as it looked like he had fulfilled his promise to Kellia after all. He was thankful for the unexpected turn of events. In that case, he had no more concerns. With his mind now clear, he focused on what lay ahead: revenge. But first, he had to escape and survive. He immediately headed towards the exit. He knew the narrowest passage would be his best bet. The entrance outside was smaller, meaning the guards would be relatively weaker. With this in mind, he moved swiftly and silently. Lin Tian made his way through the cave, his senses heightened. Just as he expected, as he got close to the exit, he could already hear someone outside. From their attire, it seemed like they were Knights of the Holy Order. Quickly, he hid in the shadows and eavesdropped to gather more information. Thankfully, with nothing to do, the knights easily got bored and started chatting. Just as Lin Tian had thought, one of the knights expected that any goblin running out from this small entrance would be nothing but trash. They believed they could crush it with one blow. But hunting goblins wasn't their only priority. As Lord Loader had ordered, any girl trying to escape in the chaos had to be killed. They couldn't let this reach the village, so they would also dispose of the body instantly and eliminate any witnesses. This chatter only solidified Lin Tian's belief that everyone in that damned holy order was rotten. For their own rules, they were willing to kill innocent people, let alone a goblin like him. He had no choice but to fight. With this resolve, he pinched his nose and did his best to mimic a woman's voice in distress, calling for help. This instantly lured in one of the knights, who was thinking about the reward Lord Loader would give for killing a straggler. He approached the cave entrance with a two-faced smile. As he got closer, the knight called out, reassuring the supposed woman not to be afraid and claiming he was there to take her back. But instead of finding a woman, he was met with a dagger plunging deep into his brain, killing him instantly. With this, Lin Tian made his first kill. Hey! All jokes aside, if you like this video, please like and subscribe for more. Peace.